Hello, and welcome to another segment of the Coatesville Area Public Library's Oral History Project. I'm your host, Kirk Witmer, and with me today is not a native Coatesvillian, but close to it. With us today we have Irene Downs, who came to Coatesville at the age of 3. Good afternoon, Irene. I'm glad that you could be with us today. Irene, I understand that you came to Coatesville from the Northbrook area because you had a death in the family, and you came to Coatesville because you had relatives here at the early age of 3. Is that right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And you started school when you were 7 years old, I think you told me?
Yes,
And where did you go to school, Irene?
I went to Houstonville School.
Mm-hmm.
And the place was called Boxtown then.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there until we moved from there to Coatesville proper. And we lived on Merchant Street. Then from there on, I went to the schools in Coatesville.
What do you remember about that school?
Oh, I thought they were great. They're much better then and well now, although we had teachers who were very strict. But our parents always said the teachers was right. No, if they were wrong, they still were right. And they had a close association with the parents. So I think that made the teacher and the parent and the school more agreeable to each other. Mm-hmm. And you weren't allowed to go home and say the teacher corrected you, because that was another basic trouble you had at home.
Because then you'd get yelled at when you got home?
What did you do in school? And I will remember, this is one thing I'll never forget, and that was the Revolutionary War. I don't know what happened to me that day, but I didn't know anything she asked. Well, the teacher knew that I knew it, so she kept me in every day till 4 o'clock reciting the Revolutionary War. When I got through with it, I thought I was fighting the war. I thought I was in it. And my mother said to me, why didn't you ask one question and you wouldn't have to stay in every day? I said, I don't know. Well, anyway, they were satisfied, so I stayed every day from the first chapter to the last till 4 o'clock. Mm-hmm. And my parents never said anything against it. The teacher still was right. So from then on, I began to listen now. I don't want to stay in school every day, so I always knew my lesson. And my English teacher, well, she was very, very strict. Mrs. Florence Burke, I'll never forget her. But I don't know, they really did teach, and you had a fear of the teacher, not scared of them, but had a fear. And as I said before, they always were right. And I think that helped a lot with the children. Mm-hmm. And today, I said, when we went to school, it was books and pencils. Today is something else that you used to go to school with. And we weren't allowed to fight. If we started fighting, you were kept in for that too, because children will fight each other. But as far as anything else, I think we got along very well in Coatesville. We had no trouble, and we played with each other, colored in of course we knew the different in color, but we got along with the different in color, not like today. And I know, of course, we carried our lunch to school, and we would go to some of the other kids' house to eat our lunch, because there's mostly white children in the school here, because there wasn't that many of the people that were going to school here. So, well, I didn't have no trouble. Now, as far as discrimination, I don't know anything about it, no more than we had to live where we could afford to live, so on. For the discrimination came more predominant this late date. And because we knew the difference, and we didn't live with each other, but we still was friendly with each other, which makes, to me, it was just as happy living on Merchant Street as those who were living on another street. Mm-hmm. And that's about all until I got older. But I had to work. And when I'd go uptown, sweep the people's sidewalks, or wash the dishes on Saturday, all like that, to make a little money.
Mm-hmm. Doing odd jobs where you could.
And then I had to pay they give you about $4. Then you pay your parents $2. Well, later on, they explained to me they didn't really need the $2, but the reason when I'd get up and grow out into the world, I had to pay other people. They weren't going to give me anything. So I came up with that idea, and it didn't hurt me any. And they weren't afraid to whip you either if they had to. Oh, they would crack you. I remember I came up to the 5 and 10 cent store when I should have gone home. Well, when my mother met me at the door coming out, she had a long switch, and she switched me all down Main Street, and all the kids were looking and laughing at me, but I was afraid to cry. Then when she got me home, she explained to me that she knew that I wouldn't steal anything, but if the other kid had picked up something, I would be in it. You always have money when you go into the store, and never touch anything on the counter, because you might break it, then you have to pay for it. So that way, that's the way I came up.
Tell us, if you will, about that 5 and 10 cent store.
It was a Duncan 5 and 10 cent store, named by Duncan. Then later on, Woolworths came. Now McCoy's came. I was grown when that store came, but we did have a Woolworth, and of course Woolworth, was originally from Lancaster, and so they went to Duncan 5 and 10 cent store, but you were never allowed to touch anything on the counter. And if anything you want, they would pick it up themselves and show it to him. If they could afford to buy it, to buy it. And then our toy shop was on First Avenue. It was not Devin's. I can't think of the 5 and 10 cent store. I mean the hardware store. Get mixed up there.
The hardware store on First Avenue?
Yeah.
Was Devitt's?
No, Pownell.
Oh, before that?
Yeah, Pownell.
Okay.
Devitt's came after I was growing up. No, it was Pownell hardware store.
I'm sorry, what was the name again?
Pownell, Pownall. And they had Santa Claus there and everything. And we would go to the 5 and 10 cent store, because Lucan's, they'd always have a Christmas party on Saturday. That's where you get gifts. They would give you gifts. I think I have some gifts now that they had given. To all the children would get gifts for Christmas. And of course, with the moving picture, you know what that was, Cinderella and all that. But
where was the movie theater, do you recall?
The moving picture theater we had was called, the first one was on First Avenue, and but it didn't have a real name for it. It was just a movie house. And then later on, they built the ones that they call the auditorium. But then we had on Chestnut Street, we had what they call the Opera House. Well, that was people come in to have vaudeville. And that was where the post office is now on Chestnut Street. And we'd go there, and of course the different vaudevilles, come in and laughable. And then next it was the auditorium, and then the Palace Theater. The Palace Theater, you sit on Main Street, and the screen was on Harmony Street. And we had, but I don't know, it just seemed like we were happy. But now everybody's miserable. And that's about all. Of course, I grew up and was getting older. But then when the war came, the First World War, because I was still in school, I remember that very well. And of course, the Second World War, which started in 1942, well, that's when first, I went back to school, to Gordon High School. They had a extension course from Penn State. I was always very good at math, but I didn't have anything, only chemistry. But to take the course, it was dealing with physics. Well, of course, Mr. Clipple, he was teaching that class. And so I made it, and I worked during the war down in Elkton, Maryland, and measuring detonators and then shells until the war was over. And so then my next job was, I said, well, I opened up a beauty shop. Well, a friend of mine came in and she said, Irene, you're not going to have any benefits working in a beauty shop. come to where she was working. Well, she was working down in Emeryville. And I told her the people down there were crazy. She said, well, they were still walking the street, so come on down with her. So I went down, and that's where I finished my work down to Emeryville. And now I'm retired. Then I came out and I started doing volunteer work. I worked at the library, and I worked at Red Cross. I think I worked for Red Cross about 20 years because I had to go down to Philadelphia once a week to take the course, they call it social worker, an aide to social worker.
Mhm.
So I did that. And then when the Red Cross moved out of Coatesville, then it was very hard for me to go back and forth to Westchester. So then I got on the Bluemobile. I worked with them until I couldn't work. Then I still did library work. And that's about all until I got to a place where I had to retire. I didn't want to retire, but I had to because my age was against me. My eyes more than my age. And that's about all of my life as far as growing up. And of course my childhood life, that's like all children. We slept all day. Some days that the school would have to close because they couldn't get the building warm enough. But we stayed out all day anyway.
Yeah.
And my mother said, well, my gosh, you might as well stay in the school and be out here sledding.
And where did you sled?
6th Avenue.
Mhm.
And they would rope the street off, so
Yes.
you wouldn't come all the way out on the highway.
Mhm.
And when you go up there, and your parents will be out there watching. And it was a family photographer, Mrs. Folk, F-A-U-L-K. And she would make cocoa for us, and all like that, keep us warm, and up and down, up and down. Well, they had something called belly bumper. The kids didn't have any sled of their own, so they'd jump on your back.
Oh.
Well, they hurt me jumping on my back, so I had a dog. I trained a dog to get on my back.
So that no one else could.
Because he would growl at them if they tried. And my aunt said, you're mean. I said, yes, but they hurt me when they jump on my back. Because 4 and 5 kids trying to pile on you coming down. So my dog wouldn't allow them to do it. You know, it's just that we had fun. Very much. So every time I think about it and think about what's going on today, I just can't believe it.
Irene, you talked earlier about things to do in Coatesville when you were a teenager. There were movie theaters and there was the vaudeville
Mhm.
house on Chestnut Street there. How did one get around? I imagine you did a lot of walking.
We walked.
But what
We
transportation was available to you back then?
walked.
Mm-hmm.
They had a trolley car that ran from here, we called it a trolley car then, that would go into Westchester. Then also we had one that would go up to Lancaster,
Mm-hmm.
a trolley car. In the summertime, with a summer car, you know, you rolled curtains down in case it rained. And then we used to go up to Rocky Springs for a picnic. Then we'd go to Leonard P. for a picnic. And the transportation was walking. Walked to school. When I first started school, I walked 2 miles going and 2 miles going back in the snow. But we didn't mind it. Today the kids have all the nice comfort on the bus. But I still don't approve of the bus. I like area schools. But I guess it's cheaper for them to have a school the way up. But I don't say it's any cheaper because they got to pay for them to take care of the bus, buy the gas. So to me, it run into money anyway.
Obviously, someone who has lived through the Great Depression of the 1930s must have some memories about it. Can you share them with us?
Well, the memories wouldn't be too great as far as money-wise eating. See, my aunt, she worked for the Worth, Mrs. Worth. And of course, you know, they were high on the hog. They lived there good, and they would pay her money. And then they owned the store also, so we would get things that way. So we worked, and then I would go up and help. So we both worked at the Worth, Mrs. Worth, who the store was.
And
Her home was on 3rd Avenue.
What kind of work were you doing there?
Housework,
Mm-hmm.
cooking, cleaning, whatever. just regular housework. And but that's about all we could do in those days, 'cause we didn't have the education law for the office works, and of course then they weren't hiring you anyway. But we made it through the Depression, and even when they had the stamp business, she would give us stamps, because they didn't need all that they didn't need them anyway. So therefore, we lived just as good as anybody else. That's why we never was hungry for anything. And then when she died, of course, she left all the help a certain amount of money. So the Worth brothers was the mill at that time. The Lukens weren't as big as Worth brothers. I mean, as far as work-wise, because the Worth brothers. Well, I think Worth brothers owned half of Coatesville, from the Black Horse Hill on down to out by the way, going out towards Ursuline. They used to call the place Hunky Hill. All that Bruce's were Worth brothers owned all of that on that side. Then you had the Luray scrapyard. But Lukens wasn't quite as big working as the Worth brothers. And there were two of those, Sharpworth and Billworth. Now, some of them are still living. But they were very good, because when anything would get tight as far as the money was, they'd bring you coke. You know what coke is?
To use in a furnace.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, they would bring you coke to heat. They would give it to you. So the people in those days were very friendly, and thought well of people. And they never let you go hungry. And we never got, well, I would say that uncomfortable. But today, it's just a little bit different, because everybody's fighting at each other's back. So therefore, we lived pretty good during the Depression. And so then, and everything was good. And later on, Mrs. Spackman, she was a Worth, and she got married, so she had a lot of help. So that helped too. So they were, they built that house there on Chestnut Street, where the Winchers lived, undertaking farm. That was Edward's home.
Mm-hmm.
Where Dr. Fransella is, that was Bill's home. And of course, Mrs. Spackman, she inherited the other place from her uncle, Sharpworth, because he never married. So therefore, we didn't really have any trouble. And I don't think anybody else, because the mills would work off and on. Of course, during the war, the mill worked very, very, the First World War they worked, and then the Second World War, why, Worth brothers had what you call that Bessemer steel, which was very hard steel. And that was what you call a blast furnace.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would, at night you'd wait for it to blow up. It sounded like it was blowing up, it would go off like a gun. And but I don't think we suffered. We had more then than we have now, because everybody now is using the credit card. Well, they don't have any money either.
Irene, you've just mentioned that we had Bessemer steel. That was a very hard steel back then. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I know you haven't worked in the steel mill,
No.
but how do you know about the qualities of steel?
Well, your parents would come, your uncle, my father would come and tell you about it. But in the meantime, we had a certain amount of science in school too. You'd have, they would teach you different things about steel. It was a very hard steel. And then too, then they had the rolling mills. Well, you see, in those days, before the war, they allowed, the school kids would go through the mills. They'd have certain days where all the kids would go and see them doing things.
Go and take a tour.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
But after the war, you weren't allowed to go in. But we would see, and they would stop the cranes from work till the kids would go through. And then that rolling mill where they would roll iron out to a certain, well, whatever they wanted to get, so many inches, as they call it. And but it was a hard steel, good steel. So you really had more education of looking at things than all books. And of course, then when we had in 8th grade, you'd have what you call general science. By the time you get to high school, you decide special one. But we got a lot of that because we could go over the hills. The teachers would take you out, go and the flowers and so forth. And then, of course, you come down to biology. And so by the time you got to high school, why, you were pretty well prepared to take whatever you wanted. And I took an academic course. And that's how I made it. I was pretty good in math at that time. I don't know what I could do with it now. And but I enjoyed my life and everything, and I like Coatesville. And no matter where you go, you'll always want to come back. And as you think about it, Coatesville's the best place to live. You may have your troubles, but I still like it.
Irene, as you think back over the years and consider the face of Coatesville or the look of Coatesville, what is it that you can think of that once existed but is no more and was a surprise or a shock to you to see it disappear?
Well, for thing that, as we call it, Main Street, no stores. All the stores are gone. And Saturday night, Friday night rather, was a big night in the town. Everybody come into town to shop. You have a nice fun, but all the stores are gone. We had Speakman's, a bookstore, and we had all those. And you had your ice cream parlors where you could sit. But you walk down the street now on each side, the stores are all closed. We had Acme, we had Fair Food, and no more. No more stores, only just bad stuff going on.
Well, with all those stores back in those earlier years, were there traffic problems? Were the sidewalks crowded?
Were they crowded?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, they were crowded because the farmers and all would come in town to shop. They come bringing a horse and buggy, and hitch the horse up to the pole out there and go in. That was a big night to shop, big night. And then the Chester Valley Bank, that was called the Farmers Bank, because the rich farmers started that bank.
Mm-hmm.
Now they would come in with horse and buggy from out then, Ursuline, Joe Run, those places where they'd come in. McElhaney, all of those people. And then next thing I noted was called the Chester Valley Bank. Now it's called, then it was the Provident Bank. Now it's the PNCB Bank. So you see how much it has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And we always dealt at that bank, the Farmers Bank. And I think they have some pictures down there somewhere where they, with the horse and buggy, where they used to come in.
When was the last time you can recall seeing a working horse on the streets of Coatesville?
Oh, I can't remember that. That's a long, not a working horse.
In the 30s or the 40s? Or?
It must be earlier than that. A working horse. I remember, I couldn't give the year. I remember when the fire engines were pulled by horses.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Coatesville. And I remember when, I forget who bought those horses. I think it was a feed store. And they couldn't untrain the horses. Because the minute they hear the whistle blow, why?
The horse was raring to go, huh?
Yeah. So they had, I don't know, I guess they put them out on the farm. And we used to always laugh, they're going to a fire. And then, oh, I got to tell you this. The poor boy, he was 9 years old. In 9th grade. He was retarded. And we would ask him to help us with our algebra. And we knew that he couldn't do it. But they didn't want to put him out of school because he wasn't doing any harm. So we would ask him to help us, and oh, poor fellow, he was trying to help us with our algebra. Mr. Vanderslice, he found out what we were doing. He called everybody to the auditorium that morning. He didn't call any name or anything, but he let us know he shamed us. And then later on, they let him graduate, gave him all his books. Then the firemen took him. You know, the firehouse there on Main Street right across from the towers.
Mhm.
Well, he became a fireman.
At the Washington Hose Company.
Yeah, sit on the bench with him. They give him his boots when the fires go out. When they've had a fire, they put him on a truck, away they'd take him. And by the time they got there, when the fire was being ready to come back, he was still trying to put on his boots. And they kept him for rolling. When he died, why, the firemen turned out with him. That's just how kind they was to him. And he knew he wasn't no fireman. But for some reason, he could play the organ. So he's played for the church. And if he heard the fire whistle for a choir, he'd run and leave them in.
Leave the organ and go to the fire.
But now today they wouldn't treat him that nice. Today they wouldn't be that kind to him. And so I like. Now where I was born was on a farm, a dairy farm down in Northborough. That's where my father worked. Dairy farm.
Irene, earlier in our interview, you talked about the fact that as children, you would all play together.
Oh yeah, we did.
No matter what race, you were all mixed together and
Right.
went to each other's homes for lunch,
That's
etc.
right.
And that doesn't happen quite as much anymore.
No, because the Shracks lived on Chestnut, Chestnut Street.
Mhm.
And their back was to the school where I went to on Main Street. And of course, we could take our lunch and go over there and just eat with them. And we go places, but no more. I know that there was always a form of discrimination with all races, and not only the colored people only. But the only thing different between there is they stuck together as one race, where we were scattered and lost the religion, where, like, if the Polish people come, they all were Catholics. If the Italians came, they all were Catholics. When the Jewish people came, they all were Judaism, wherein they separated the Africans when they came over, because they came from different parts of Africa, and they didn't know. I think it's over 1,000 dialects over in that part of the country. So by being separated that way, you couldn't get together with one religion. One didn't have to be religion, but be together as one set of people. So therefore, that would divide the people. And then, of course, other things came along that divide us too, which doesn't make any sense to me. But
Give me some examples.
huh?
Give me some examples of those other things.
Well, it isn't so nice to me, because everybody knows what happened down south.
Mhm.
Why, the master and the slave and so forth. Well, now, what they would do there, when they did start to being friendly enough to give you a job, what they would say, they would give the high yellows, as they call it, a job. And of course, the dark person, he was too dark. And that went on over into the colored race, too. The lighter you were, the more opportunity you had. They would call you black, black, black. And so therefore, it really spilled over in the colored race as much as it did with the white race. But then it got to the point, if you were too fair, well, then they didn't want you because you thought you was part of them. So the blacker you were, you could get a job because nobody had been filtered into that part. I mean, that was the idea. But it wasn't true, but that's the way they believed. And so you had to go along the way that they believed it. But it didn't make any difference to me who I am, so long I can walk. And as for the other race of people, my aunt always taught me and my mother that they weren't better than me, and I wasn't better than they were. So she always used the word, when you walk down the street, walk tall. That meant don't walk left or right, just keep your head high, no matter who you are. And that's still with me today. I don't care who you are, I feel just as good as you are. And I think that's a good way to feel.
I think so too.
That's just a good way to feel. And I remember going into church. We had a priest, and he always laughed at me, you know. He said, Irene, he said, I love to see you walk into the church. You walk in like you own the church. I said, I do own the church. And I said, if I sit down beside that lady and she was calling me a name, I said, she got to pray the same as I do. And he would laugh, you know. I know she wasn't, but I mean, I just let him know there was no difference between her trying to get to heaven, if there was such a thing as heaven, and me. But you have to think that way. You got to think. You don't tear one person down for the other. And you think that you're better. You're not. We're all the same people. Different colors, that's all. Different shades.
Irene, you've seen a lot of changes in the Coatesville area and in the community itself. And I have to ask you, as we move on into the future, what are your thoughts about what is likely to happen in Coatesville, what could happen in Coatesville, and what do you hope will happen in Coatesville?
Well, I hope nothing will change. Try to get to your babies and start teaching them from now on. You can't do anything with the older ones because they're gone. But if the churches or whatever organization you have would take the babies and try to train them from up. You can train them and teach them. But now the children are not being taught to go to church. They're not being taught anything. The church doesn't do it, but they have a certain moral there. And I think that that'll happen. And I can see things changing before the millennium comes in too. I see a lot of changes. Because I don't know whether you've been reading, listening to on TV, lots of things that the Africans did was kept hidden. Now it seems to be coming out. And they always had a saying in the black race, all dirt comes out in the wash. And I say we're coming through the rinsing because I didn't know that there was 25,000 Negroes who fought in the Revolutionary War until here about a couple of weeks ago on TV. And I didn't know that where they call you Afro-American, they call themselves African-American or black or whatever they want to term it. There was a lady up in Boston. She got the Constitution out and showed us that we were made Americans because Lincoln was losing the war to the South, and he needed the slaves down there to fight. So he had to call Emancipation Proclamation. He had to give them the rights, and he made them Americans to fight. And she proved it. She wasn't going to call her Afro-American. Now, on my papers from school when I went in, it said Negro American. Now they call them Afro-American when they go to school, but my school paper said Negro American, just like you say Indian American. Well, that's on my school paper when I went to school, and I can show it to you. Negro American, so I'm still American. And I showed it to somebody. They couldn't believe it. I said, that's when I started school, that we were called Negro Americans. And so therefore, we did have a better title. Well, I mean, of course, right now I consider myself an American, but and then another thing they had that was kind of peculiar, and of course, we knew that about the blood, and so one day one of the nurses gave me the paper to read. They always thought that if you would have blood, colored blood put in you, you'd become black. So I said, well, they could believe that. I said, but do you know that there wasn't that many black people giving blood at that time because of the reason? I said, but yet if I would get sick and they had the white person's blood in, they weren't going to let me die. They'd give me the white man's blood. I said, now, just think of it. It would be really a war in there because they were all going to thought it'd be white because getting white person's blood. Give me that blood. But they proved that what they were trying to prove, all blood is red.
Yes.
It didn't come that way. It come through the genes. But the thinking, the way they were thinking, and so I thought, dude, this Irene, when I see you laugh, you got something up your sleeve. And I think that's the way to take life.
Mhm.
Laugh at everything that you think is simple, and take it seriously if it's really true. And so, and with me doing all kind of work, volunteer work, I've come across a lot of things that have changed completely. And I think all people are getting a different thought of life. And, but you have to go back and get history and follow it through.
Well, what you said a moment ago about 25,000 black Americans fighting in the Revolutionary War,
Mhm.
I think it's very significant and important to note that you just found out about that a few weeks ago, you said.
Mhm.
I think the importance of that lies in the fact that you're just a few weeks short of your 96th birthday.
Mhm.
And if it took you, with all of your life experience, that long to find out that kind of a fact, then we as a society have to take a much closer look at our history.
Yes, it's coming out. That's what I'm saying about all dirt comes out in the wash. Why, that's what I'm saying. This is going to come on to the next millennium,
Mhm.
because so many things are coming out that we did not know. They didn't teach us in history. They kept it hidden from us. Now, like your lights, the traffic lights. What was his name? He invented it. He sold to Western Union for $40,000. Well, of course, he sold his rights.
Mhm.
So, of course, it's been improved on him. And then also Latimer, he helped Edison with the tungsten. But he did sue Edison to get something out of it. He was colored. And then there was Dr. Drew, who first started the plasma in the heart trend. That came out too. I think he lived in Chicago. It's a lot of things they're bringing out that slowly. So I think by the next millennium, the children will get more history. And I don't think we have anything to be ashamed of, because what happened to us to our people during the slavery time, it was no fault. And the rice, oh yeah, rice, they brought rice over, because down in North Carolina, they started making those rice patties, whatever you call them, to raise rice.
Mhm.
That was done by Africans. It was so many things they brought us over. Now my aunt, her mother was a slave. She came over, I guess, during the time of 1619, and with that bunch. Now my aunt says her mother raised all her sheep. She made her own wool. And she said she was 14 years old before she knew that you could buy material in the store. Her mother made all the material, and she'd go out in the woods and get different things out there to make her own dye. And then she said that they would lay on the floor at night and card the wool and pull it out with the comb.
Mhm.
And she had a machine, where then she would help to thread the what you call it, the machine that used. But still, they had to pedal it. They pedaled with their feet.
Mhm.
And
The weaving loom, you mean?
I guess it was called a weaving, but they had another name for the thing. But anyway, she said, and her mother make the dye, and then they would have to thread it at night, all the kids had to work. But a lot of things that the Africans at that time did bring over as they came over, because King George and them weren't going to do it. So they had to bring, but slavery, it wasn't slave when they came over. It came on later, because I think it came on a little after, because all they did was King George. And I didn't know it the other day till the Queen of Virginia was named after a virgin queen. Colfax, her name was Virginia Colfax.
Mhm.
I didn't know that until the other night on TV. You see, if the people would listen to something on the program instead of those dumb plays, why, they would learn a lot.
I'm sure.
Mm-hmm. And so it was named after that. And of course, we know the Carolinas came through the names of the queens and royal family.
Mhm.
But then, of course, the Revolutionary War changed a little bit of that. But it all worked out. It all worked out. And those hymns that they used to sing called, what did they sing? Two white horses coming after me to carry me home. That was like a telegram. Because when they started singing that, they knew that the Quakers was coming after them to take them away. And it really wasn't a spiritual, a church spiritual. Because they would come down there to bring them away from us, because they didn't like slavery at all. So a lot of those things did help. And if the people would only stop and listen, they wouldn't be mad at each other. They wouldn't be mad.
Well, Irene, you've certainly learned a lot in the time that you've spent with us here in your lifetime, and I certainly want to thank you for coming out and participating in our oral history project and sharing all that you've learned with all the folks who will be watching this tape. So I thank you again for participating in our project.